I would call you all the time complaining about stuff.
Yeah.
Finally, I guess you reached a boiling point, and you said, if you call me with another problem, I'm not answering your phone calls anymore and not giving any advice.
Yeah.
So you said the next time I have a problem, before I call you, I need to think of 2 solutions, and then I'll call you to go over the 2 solutions. If you disagree with it, then we'll go over and come up with a better solution. But I needed to teach myself how to be solution oriented. And that was one of my first lessons in having a solution-oriented mindset towards problems versus being the person that brought problems to people's attention. Because the person that brought the problem to people's attention was usually not the person that was fixing it, and I needed to be a fixer, not just a complainer. And it was good advice, because then I started thinking way more solution-oriented. And I still talk about it to this day with everybody, because that's a valuable lesson for anybody that's in a position of leadership, whether it's in the field, whether it's running an office, that you have to be solution-oriented. And I definitely was not when I first opened up. And you reached the boiling point and snapped on me. Out of the organization, and you kicked me out of the organization, and I called up Tony and said, hey, Mosier just kicked me out of the organization. And Tony's like, okay, build your own organization.
Nice.
It worked well.
Well, good. I'm glad we're starting off with a Mosier story. I like that. We'll get into the negative ones later. But no, so listen. So guys, you know, as you guys know, we have everybody from leaders on this call to, you know, owners to org heads to RCs, NCs, program directors, you name it. As you guys know, we've been trying to bring new stuff to you guys during this whole COVID stuff. And it's opened up an opportunity for us to reach out to some really, really good examples of our business that we don't normally get exposed to. And it's not like they're going to say something so drastically different that it's going to change so much for us, but it's more about hearing a different perspective, a different story. For most of you on this call, you hear from Mike Ternoni, you hear from Jeremy Mosier, you hear from me, you hear from, I don't know, the Bill Bishops and the Dwayne Longs and the Adam Geralds and the Jacob Kleins and, you know, the Joe Eckharts and the Cody Lowrys and Rafts, et cetera, and John Connies, and all, I think, you know, maybe minus me, right? But all unbelievable examples. But some of you guys don't even know that there's some really, really good people out there that are doing other programs that you don't know might fall under us that have a lot of great advice. So, you know, I wanted to bring on, you know, we brought on Larissa Holly, who runs the roadshow side of our business. And, you know, fortunately for me, I've worked with this guy for, I think 13 years now. Ken WEINRAUB, who's the guy that was just speaking with Jeremy, he started in our business a few months after I did. I think in June 2007. I started in February 2007. Some of you guys are competing against other owners, but it's friendly competition, right? And Ken was that guy 13 years ago, really 12 plus, whatever, that I looked at as, man, this guy's unbelievable. He's on fire. And he was the Northern great rookie example, door-to-door home improvement guy. And I was the Southern boy example, you know, rookie that was doing pretty well with home improvement door-to-door. And Jeremy Mosier would always call me and say, man, this Ken guy's got 50 guys. And I would go, fuck, how does he have 50 guys? I've only got 40. What is that? I'm crazy. And I remember the day I heard Ken WEINRAUB did 100 interviews in a day. And I'm like, you got to be kidding me. And there was always this like back and forth bar that got set. And Ken was a superstar. And fortunately, I was doing well as well. And it was cool. You know, Ken did the door-to-door power siding and windows. And I went heavy into the Sears home improvement side, but both doing door-to-door lead generation. And, you know, it was this back and forth. Both of us were in Jeremy Mosier's organization. And Ken went on to get promoted to regional consultant in the Bahamas. And I got promoted to regional consultant in the Bahamas. Ken went on to become a program director, national consultant. And fortunately, I did as well. He smoked me to national consultant and program director. But it was cool. You hear about those stories of guys that come in this generation at a time. And then they kind of compete, they share stories, you know, they go back and forth, they use each other for networking examples. And that's what Ken and I were. And then, you know, when we lost Sears, that's when I got an opportunity to get involved back with Jeremy Mosier, and I got plugged into Michael Mariash and Mike Ternoni. And in that moment in time, Ken went on to run, and still does today, the whole door-to-door side of our business, and works really, really close with Larry Tannenbaum. So, he's a really humble guy. I'll probably tell you some cool stories, but he's one of the most well-disciplined examples that I've seen of our business, probably ever in my career, prior to hearing the stories about the Jeremys and the Mikes, et cetera, that we hear about. He big 7-figure earner for you guys that care about income. He made 7 figures and ran a program before most people approach regional or national consultant. He's got multiple regionals and nationals on his team. He's got program directors on his team. I don't even know how many offices he has. I didn't ask him that question. But he got promoted, I think 8 months, 9 months, a year or so into the business. I don't have like a full bio. It's more about just what I know about Ken. And like I said, really disciplined. I know he's started in Jersey, started actually, I don't know if it was on Power, it might have been certificates. And then when we got involved with doing home improvement, direct TV, we were finding this new identity. Ken and I were some of the first owners that transitioned into actually having employees instead of 1099 people. But I'm pretty sure, Ken, you hear about all these stories about door-to-door and strict commission and night atmosphere. Whoa, what was that like? Ken still does those things still today on a regular basis, and has a really flourishing organization, et cetera. So what I was going to do, I'm going to ask Ken a series of questions, and then Ken's going to answer them, and then just kind of elaborate on them. You guys know we have a Kahoot that's going to be after this. This could go on for 30, 45 minutes, an hour, no time limit or whatever. And then if you guys have questions like Jeremy just did, we just talked about what Jeremy's a story about Jeremy Mosier and Ken and a really good impact. So you guys just put it in the chat button down here, you guys know, and then I'll ask the question to Ken, and I'll try to make sure it's some of the best questions we have. So Ken, all good? Anything you want to say before we jump in and start drilling you with questions?
Well, I know you gave the time frame of 30 to 45 minutes. There's a running joke with me on our side that if you tell me to speak for 5 minutes, then I'll wind up talking for 2.5 hours. When I was out in Van's office in San Diego, he had a broken clock in his atmosphere room that said like 9:30 the whole time. So Van's like, hey, so I was there with Mike Lay, and he's like, can you come up and talk? So I looked at Mike and said, hey, do you want me to speak first? And Mike's like, yeah, you could talk first. I'm like, all right, I'll talk for 15, 20 minutes. So I go up there and I look at the clock and it says like 9:30. So I'm talking and 2 hours goes by. And then at the end, I look at the clock, I'm like, oh, it's only 9:30. I'm like, it feels like we've been up here for way longer. And Ben's like, no, you talked for about 2 hours. So as long as I don't bore anybody, I definitely have no problem spending more than 30 to 45 minutes. But if I do start boring people, Zach, just send me a text message and say, hey, we'll wrap this up and we'll continue at another time. But so hopefully people have their whole early afternoons cleared.
We do. They're used to me. They're used to Mike T. They know. We talk. All right. So listen, Kenny, what'd you do prior to this industry work-wise? And how'd you get your start in our business?
Well, my backstory in the business, I graduated college in 2006. I went to a school up in North Jersey called Montclair State University. I was a major in political science with a minor in sociology. I chose political science because it was one of the easier majors, not because I wanted to do anything in politics or had any interest at all in going down that road. So that's the major that I took. I played sports in college. I originally went to school to play football, but I wound up playing lacrosse. So when I graduated in 2006, my first career path or attempt at a career path was applying to the CIA. So I sent in my application. I had 2 references that sent letters in. One of them was a retired police officer in the CIA, and then one of them was active. So they send letters of recommendation. When you send in the application, they send you something back, send you a letter back that says, hey, if you don't hear something within 45 days, thanks for applying, but we'll keep your resume on file. So 40 days goes by. My mother's like, hey, did you hear anything back from the CIA yet? And I was like, no, haven't heard anything back. 5 more days goes by, and I know I'm at that 45-day limit. And she's like, did you hear anything back yet? Aren't you close to 45 days? And I was like, oh, I think I still have 5 more days. But then at 45, I knew that the time has passed. So it really screwed up, what my career plans were and, what I was going to do. I applied to every position at Major League Baseball. I applied for every position at the NFL, WNBA, customer service positions, ticket sales positions. Everything that I could find an application for online is what I applied for. My best friend's sister's boyfriend worked at Merrill Lynch. He was VP of finance or VP of something, and he got me into their training program to become a financial advisor. So I went on an interview there. I became a financial advisor. I started doing the testing for it. After you passed the Series 7 test, what they did was they brought you around to everybody that worked for Merrill Lynch. So they brought you to everybody that had a window office and an office on the outside of the floor. So they're like, everybody that you're about to meet, makes $250,000 or $500,000 a year or more. And I was like, oh my God, I'm about to meet people that are making $500,000. Like, I was so pumped up about it because I had never, spent or met anybody that was making that kind of money. So they introduce you to each person, they walk you around, and we get to the last person. And I don't know how old he was, but had to be in his late 60s, maybe early 70s. And he's sitting there on the phone, still making phone calls. And we walked into his office to be introduced, and he kind of gave us like the, I'm busy, like step out. And I went home that night, and my father was like, how was work today? I'm like, it wasn't that good. And he's like, what wasn't good about it? I said, well, we met all the people that were making, $500,000 or more a year. And he's like, well, that's good. And I'm like, yeah, but, the last guy that we met, was 70 years old, and, he was the highest earner there. But, I don't still want to be on the phones calling clients and, doing that kind of stuff at 70 years old. And my father gave me this whole long speech. He's like, your generation, you think you're going to make all this money right away. You think you're going to be a millionaire at 24. It took me 20 years to make, over $100,000 from Nissan. And he's like, and you think you're going to get it right away. And I'm like, great speech, but I'm really not feeling it. I was like, I'm going to quit. And he's like, that's going to be a bad decision. And I'm like, well, I'm just not feeling like what the long-term, goal is or what the gain is. So I wound up quitting. I had another stint at a smaller company called First Investors. And even with Merrill Lynch, like I was really bad on the phones. Like any of the practice phone calls that we had, not that I handled rejection poorly, but I did not have a great phone voice. I'm extremely monotone. So, I wasn't good at catching people's attention with, anything on the phones. So it's almost weird that I was good with door-to-door sales, or weird that I was good with recruiting, but I really struggled with being on the phone. Maybe if I looked at the phone part of the sale and had more success with it, I would have been more open-minded to being on the phone at 70 years old, but I was really nervous and not comfortable with that initial phone call. But I did have another small month-long stint at a company called First Investors. It was another financial planning company. Same thing though, I don't know why I thought I was going to have a different attitude. I then worked at a golf course throughout college. So I went back there, for a couple months. I cleaned up golf balls on the driving range. I cleaned the batteries on golf carts. I wasn't a caddy. I worked at the starter shack to send people to the east and west course, and if they started on the back nine or the front nine. I had no interest in playing golf. I don't really play ever. I probably have the patience for 7 or 8 holes, and then that's it. And again, maybe if I was better, I'd be more excited about it, but I never really enjoyed it. But I did work there. I made $9.25 an hour. And because it was my fourth year working there, I got a 25-cent raise. I was pretty pumped about it at the time. In May of 2007, I really had a low moment in my life. I was about a year removed from graduating. I wasn't really doing anything. You know, my father wasn't happy that I left, you know, the jobs that I had, and, you know, he was kind of looking at me like, what are you doing? I went out into the city that's next to the town that I live in, and, you know, definitely was out too late, and definitely, you know, said the wrong stuff to a group of people, and, you know, wound up not in a great position the next morning. And my father walked into my bedroom and was like, just shook his head at me and didn't even say anything, just shook his head. And I'm like, damn, like, I'm a loser. Like, I'm not doing anything with my life. So at that point, I really needed to, you know, find a job. You know, 2 or 3 weeks later, my buddy and I went down to Atlantic City. You know, I had maybe $500 saved at the time, and, you know, I tried playing blackjack to make some money and wasn't good at blackjack, and, you know, wound up coming home with $50 left to my name. And at that moment, I was in a little bit of a panic that I needed to, you know, do something, and I needed to make money. My buddy interviewed at a company in North Jersey called Manhattan Trading Co., which went business to business selling products like coloring books, cameras, and some of these other accessories that I guess Larry was selling with the clearance business. So I called him up that day and I'm like, how was the interview? And he's like, oh, it was really good. I said, how much did they pay you? And he said, we made like $400 a week plus commission. And I'm like, wow, $400 a week. I'm like, that's better than nothing right now. And it's definitely more money than I made at the golf course at $9.25. So I was like, what was the name of the company again? And it said Manhattan Trading Co. So I went home that afternoon or that night, and I went on Career Builder and I looked up Manhattan Trading Co. Couldn't find anything on it, but I found a company called World Access Marketing. So I was like, oh, maybe Kevin just got the name of the company wrong, because it looked like World Access Marketing wasn't in Hackensack, but it was right near Hackensack. So I was like, maybe they do the same thing. So I sent in my resume. What's funny too is you say that, you know, you and I obviously go back to 2007 of Stardate, but if I think back to the website that World Access Marketing had back in 2007, they had like this weird techno music playing. It was like dun dun dun, and they had a picture of a baseball field, and a ball would go over the fence, and it would say home run, and then like fans would be cheering. And I remember when I saw their website, I'm like, damn, this is a sick website. Like, this company really looks like it's got their stuff together. And it said opening up soon in Denver, in San Diego. I'm like, wow, I could potentially open up in San Diego. And that's what I was like so excited about. And the website was so bad. But 13 years ago, I was like beyond impressed with the music in the background. It's so catching. So I was really intrigued about World Access Marketing. But I sent my resume in. You know, I did see an ad online that said, like, are you competitive? Do you like sports? So I really felt like that ad was, you know, really talking to me. I was like, I like sports. I'm competitive. This seems like the perfect fit. So I sent in my application. And that afternoon, I got a call from an administrator. Her name was Jen Schloter. She said, hey, you know, the managers reviewed your resume, and, you know, we wanted to bring you in for a first round interview. So I said, okay. She said, what's your schedule? I said, well, I could come in today. She said, well, we've wrapped up interviews for today. You know, how about tomorrow? So I said, all right, sounds perfect. So, you know, I scheduled, you know, the next day, maybe my interview was at 1 o'clock or 2 o'clock. And, you know, that night I drove up to North Jersey, which was about 45, 50 minutes away from my house. And I made sure I knew where the office was. I made sure, you know, I wouldn't get lost, showed up on time, had my resume printed out on watermarked paper, had 50 copies of it in, you know, padded manila envelopes, so nothing happened to it. The next morning I drove up, there was, you know, 5 other people, you know, sitting in the lobby. And I remember looking at everybody, looking at their shoes, you know, looking at what kind of suit they had on, you know, eyeing everybody up and, okay, I'm better than that person. I'm better than that person. there was two people doing interview that day, that afternoon. One of the girls' name was Sonia, and then Tony Rodriguez, who wound up being my manager. And I really wanted to interview with Sonia, but Jen pulled my resume to the side and made sure that, Tony interviewed me. So, Tony pulled me into the office and he was like, "How was the ride in today?" I was like, "It was great." And then he just started talking, and he spoke so fast for 5 minutes, and I don't even remember what he even said. I remember him bringing up certificates, the Boston Celtics, the Yankees, and talking about like different sports teams. And then he's like, "Do you have any questions?" I said, "No, I don't have any questions." And he's like, "Okay, great. What do you got planned the rest of the day?" And I was like, "I'm going to go visit, my grandmother because I never really see her. And, my grandfather passed away like 3 or 4 years ago." And he's like, "Oh, that's really nice." And I'm like, "Yeah." And then I walked down this long hallway leaving the office. And I was like, wow. I'm like, I didn't say anything. Like, I didn't even talk. Like, this person, like, he probably thinks I'm like a mute weirdo. Like, I literally said nothing. I said, well, there's no chance in hell that I'm getting, this job. So I didn't visit my grandmother. I called my buddy up that him and I went down to Atlantic City. And I'm like, "Hey, let's go down to Atlantic City. I got $50 left and let's see what we could turn it into." So he's like, "All right, sounds great." He's like, "Sounds like a great plan." So we're driving down to Atlantic City, and then I get a phone call from Paul, who was one of the other managers in the office. And he says, "Hey, we wanted to bring you in for a second round interview." So I was like, "All right, I'm like, that sounds great." I said, I'm like, "Oh, thank God." So I made my buddy turn the car around, and we drove back up to our house, and I got ready for the second round interview, the day of observation, that next day, which was June 6th of 2007. So I get set up on my second round interview, and I get set up with this kid by the name of Charles Welker. Tony sets us up, and he's like, "Hey, Ken, this is Charles. He went to school for political science also, and he's really big into politics." And I'm like, damn, like, I know nothing about politics. Like, I'm not even gonna be able to have a conversation with this kid, about politics. And he's like, "Charles is really into it. He's gonna ask you a lot of questions." I'm like, damn, this is gonna be bad. Charles was a little weird too. He was about the same height as me, but a little bit weird of a guy.
I remember
really nice guy, really knowledgeable, but a little bit weird. So Tony sets us up, and Welker grabs my resume right away. And he starts drilling me with questions about marketing and advertising. He's like, "You don't have any experience in marketing. What makes you think you'd be a good fit here?" And I'm like, "Well, I'm really competitive." And he's like, "I'm not sure how being competitive translates to somebody that can be effective at marketing and sales." And I'm like, "Oh," I'm like, "Yeah." I'm like, "Well, I'm really open-minded. I need to get a job." And, he starts drilling me. And we get into this kid, Chris Bruno's Ford Explorer. He had a Ford Explorer Eddie Bauer edition. So I got into the back right seat. Walker was sitting up front, and Chris was driving out to the field. So, Charles is explaining to me, the clients and how we do sales for the Yankees and some of these other, local baseball teams or restaurants because they have excess inventory. And when we're driving out to the field, I asked him, I was like, "Well, how do we get paid?" And, he doesn't say anything for 30 seconds. So he turns around and he looks at me and he's like, "Well, for every one of these cards that we sell, we make $10. And then I don't say anything for 30 seconds. And then I was like, I'm like, "What if we sell 100 of them?" And he's like, "Well, then we'll make a lot of money." And I was like, "Great." I'm like, "Let's sell 100. And it wasn't until I went home that night that my mother was like, "What happens if you don't sell any, Kenny?" And I'm like, "I don't know. If we don't sell any, then we wouldn't make any money." I was like, that's such a loser's mindset. I'm like, "Why would we not sell any?" I'm like, "You own a car, right?" She's like, "Yeah." I was like, "If I can give you 4 oil changes for $30, would you buy the oil change package and then get the oil changes for free?" She's like, "Well, I guess I would." I said, "So that's one sale right there. So that's $10. So why would I not sell any?" So she's like, "All right, whatever makes you happy." She's like, "I don't really care." So, so that was, the only time that I even thought about or was even presented to me of, well, what happens if you don't sell any? But, I continued my day with Welker, and, we went out to a pizza place in upstate New York. I remember when we were at the pizza place, we actually saw Method Man from Method Man and Redman in the pizza place. And I was like, holy shit, that's Method Man. I was like, if this job's not destiny, I don't know what is. I was like, how many times do you get to see Method Man at a pizza place in upstate New York? But we're sitting there at a table, and, Welker pulls out this, napkin. So they have like the napkin dispensers in the middle of the table. He opened it up, and then it, put the napkin into 4 phases, or into 4 lines, one down the middle and one across. And Welker starts breaking down the training program. So, he's talking to me about how on the entry-level side, somebody can make $400 to $500 a day, and, it lasts for the first 2 to 8 weeks. And, here you're learning how to do the marketing, and you're learning how to do the sales. And then he goes into account management, where he's like, this is the bulk of the program. You take on more responsibility. It's 4 to 7 months. And, here you can make $500 to $600, per day and, or per week. And I'm like, okay, yeah, sounds great. And he's like, this is where you take on leadership. You start teaching, training, managing, mentoring, developing, coaching other people. He's like, I actually just got back from a trip from Dallas. He's like, have you ever been to Dallas? And I was like, no. And he's like, well, I just came back there and I bought a cowboy hat and cowboy boots. I'm like, oh, sick. I'm like, why would you buy a cowboy hat and boots? But I was like, that's so cool. I was like, I never met anybody that has been to Dallas before. I don't know why, but all I thought about was plastic surgery when he said Dallas. I was like, I remember the slogan, everything's bigger in Texas. And that's all I thought about. So then Welker goes into assistant management, 1 to 2 months, $1,000 a week. Here you're learning how to do the hiring, the firing, payroll, legal, and all these other things. And then he explains management, and he says, like, how old do you think Tony is? And, I'm like, I don't know, like 45. And he's like, no, Tony's 28. And he's like, how much do you think he makes per day or per week? And I'm like, $100,000. And he's like, Tony makes, $7 off every one of these cards that we sell. And, last week we sold X amount of cards. And he's like, so that's how much Tony makes. So I was like, wow, he makes a lot of money. And he said, yeah, in management, you can make anywhere between, $500 to $2,500 a day. So all I saw was $2,500 a day, times what I thought was Monday through Friday. So then I asked him, I said, well, how many days a week do we work? And he's like, well, we work, Monday through Friday, with Saturdays being invite only. I'm like, well, why would you make Saturday invite only if the manager's making $2,500 a day? I was like, I'll invite everybody. And he's like, well, we want to make sure that we have like the best people there. And I'm like, well, I'm inviting everybody. I'm like, what about Sundays? Can we work Sundays? I was like, it's $2,500 times 7 days. I'm like, I could be making, $10,000 to $20,000 a week. So that really caught my eye. Now, I have no idea, like, what about that napkin? It was no different than any other napkin that people wipe their face on every day at restaurants throughout the United States, or at, Burger Kings and McDonald's and pizza places. But when Welker broke that all down, I looked at it, with a belief of like, wow, that is a possibility. I don't know the number, but I'm sure lots of other people looked at that same breakdown or that same napkin and said, yeah, that's bullshit. I had blind faith in what was written on that napkin, and for whatever reason, whatever came out of Charles's mouth. And I don't know if it's because I had $50 left. I don't know if it's because I was desperate for a job. I don't know if it's because I looked at my life and said, man, you're a year removed from school and you're not doing anything. For whatever reason, I was very attracted to it. Welker wound up, going to the bathroom right there. And Chris Bruno, who was driving out to the field that day, it was him and I sitting at the table. And I said to Chris, I'm like, how do you like working here? And he's like, man, I really like it. And I'm like, why? He's like, well, Tony's a really cool guy. And, he's, super personable and, he's nice. And he's like, I was like, how long have you been here? He's like, I've been here for a week. And he's like, I just got promoted into account management. I was like, wow, you did it in, a week. That's incredible. And he said, yeah, the sales is no problem. And, blah, blah, blah. And he's like, my father didn't want me to take the job. He's like, my father is a math teacher at Maywood High School in New Jersey. And he's like, but my uncle is a senior vice president for Goldman Sachs. And he's like, he's very successful. He makes $3.5 million a year. And I'm like, wow, like I never have met anybody that's made that kind of money. And he's like, and my uncle told me to take the job because, or for him, it was an internship. Because he said my uncle told him that if he can do door-to-door sales, then he can do anything. And it will be a good learning experience for him. So I took that advice as if it was coming from my own uncle or from my own father. And, I took it as if it was my own. And when Welker, came back from the bathroom, I'm like, Welker, I really need to get this job. And he's like, well, we have, 4 hours or 5 hours left in the interview. So, let's worry about that first before you decided already that you have the job. And I'm like, okay, yeah, you're right. I need to focus on the next 5 hours. People always ask, what do the next 5 hours consist of? He asked me 2 riddles. One of them was about turning on a light switch in another room and figuring out which switch controlled the lights. It probably took me 2.5 hours to figure out. So I don't even know if we said anything for the next 2.5 hours because I was trying to figure out the riddle, and he just kept saying, you want me to give you the answer? And I was like, no, don't give me the answer. I need to figure it out. So, that was the next 2.5 hours. But, Welker did ask me as the day went on, he's like, what would you do with $1 million? No one had ever asked me that on an interview before. No one ever really made me even think about it. And, it was the first time that I had to put some thought into it. And I said, well, I guess I would save, most of it, and then I would give back to, my family, and that's what I would do with it. But it really started opening my thoughts on having more of an entrepreneurial mindset. I wish I could get on this call today or with anybody and tell people that, my family, beat me up from day one of my life and said, Ken, you need to run a business. You need to, you can't work for somebody. The money is in running a business. The money's in working for yourself. That's definitely not the environment that the WEINRAUBs had at their household at 16 Yorktown Road. Family grew up with, trips, and, if we went somewhere, it was my family, my aunt and uncle and their 2 kids and my grandparents and, one hotel room. Didn't grow up, poor, but definitely didn't grow up, with much. And my parents from very early on, kind of let me do what I wanted to do in terms of, playing with friends or riding bikes or playing sports, studying. Nobody was telling me to run a business. Nobody was saying any of those things. My parents' first questions were always like, what are the health benefits? Do you get time off? What's the, policy on those things? And if I would have found a job coming out of college that, paid me $50,000 a year, I worked 40 hours a week, gave me a company car, I would have looked at it and said that I was rich and I had the best job out there. So I was extremely fortunate that Charles started asking me some of these questions. And I was extremely fortunate that in that year between graduating college and starting that, I didn't have any of those offers. I don't know why it was that I met that person at Merrill Lynch that day that turned me off to what I wanted to do at 50 or 60 or 70 years old. But it's just so happened like that. And Charles, his questions and seeing that program and realizing, look, that opportunity, is possibly out there with that earnings potential, was super motivating. And for me, it was definitely exciting. And, I spent the rest of the day with Charles. I wound up starting. I got home super late that night. My final round interview with Tony, probably went until 10 o'clock. Chris Bruno picked us up late from the field. Welker was screaming at him on the other side of the car. He's like, don't ever pick me up late again when I'm out on a second round interview. And I'm like, damn, this guy's intense. Like, he is lacing him right now. And Charles like, okay, Ken, let's get in the car and let's head back to the office. So we headed back, and my heels were bleeding. I had my brand new Cole-On dress shoes on, and we got back to the office, and the worst feeling ever was putting the shoes, back on when we got back. And I hopped out of the car and walked upstairs, and sat down with Tony, and Welker gave me my recommendation, and Tony's like, when can you start? I said, I can start as soon as tomorrow. So I got home that night, 11:30, and my parents thought I was kidnapped the whole day because I didn't answer them. I turned my phone off. They're like, what the hell were you doing? I was like, I was on an interview. And they're like, you didn't tell us it would last all day. I'm like, I didn't know it was going to last all day. I was like, but I got the job. And they're like, well, what are you doing? I was like, we're going door to door selling oil changes. My father's like, what? I was like, he's like, be careful. Don't sign any contracts. Don't drink Kool-Aid, you know, any of that kind of stuff. And I'm like, okay, you know, whatever. My mother's like, you know, whatever makes you happy, you know, do whatever you want to do. And, you know, I started that Friday, and, you know, my first day out in the field went terrible. You know, we practice pitch that morning, and Welker asked me when we went out there, he's like, okay, do you want to practice? Do you want to, you know, do a pitch? So I said, yeah. So we walked up to this house, and, you know, I knocked on the door, and my knock was so faint. Like, it was like, I'm like, okay, if somebody's home, they're not going to hear this. So I like softly knocked on it, and Welker's like, did you knock? I'm like, yeah, I knocked. And he's like, are you sure I didn't hear this? Like, I knocked. So I step back, and, you know, 5 seconds goes by, and I was like, I don't think anybody's home. Charles was like, no, I hear movement. So he's like, get your weight on your back foot, you know, get ready. And this kid comes to the door. He's probably 20 years old. You know, he just came home from the Navy. He had his Navy hat on, Navy shirt. And I'm like, hey, man, how are you? And I was like, my name's Ken. And then I threw up like all over the kid's front steps. And I turn around and I look at Welker. And Welker's just staring at me with like, what the hell just happened? So I don't say anything to Welker, but I give him 2 thumbs up of like how was that? And he was like, that was terrible. I was like, has that ever happened before? And he's like, no. And thank God Welker didn't have a car. So thank God he wasn't a higher earner in the field. And thank God he was kind of a loser. And he's like, I would have taken you back to the office and blown you out of the business. So I said, what do we do for the rest of the day? And he's like, just don't say anything. I was like, I can't talk to anybody. He's like, don't talk to anybody. I'm like, what about the mailman? He's like, no, don't talk to anybody. So I was like, all right, I'll just shadow you the rest of the day. So I spent the day with him. I didn't talk to anybody. You know, of course, he was asking me more weird riddles and, you know, stuff like that. And, you know, we get back to the office, and I'm sitting in the lobby, and Welker is sitting in Tony's office. And he's like, man, Ken's a good guy, but he is a project. And I'm like, how the fuck is this guy going to call me a project? Like, I'm not a project. Like, don't call me that. And I came in that Saturday, you know, spent the day with Charles, but, you know, I went home that weekend, and, you know, I practice pitched all day on Sunday with my family. You know, I had this long driveway, and, you know, I'm standing all the way down in the street. My parents are standing at the door. I'm walking up to the house. Hey, how are you? My name's Ken. I'm out here from Midas. It's our, you know, 50th anniversary. Just giving away some free oil changes. You want a car? And they'd be like, yeah, it's in the driveway. I'd be like, great. So I spent, you know, 8-9 hours that Sunday, you know, practicing. I showed up to the office on Monday, you know, probably 2 hours early, because I was looking for anybody to practice pitch with me, because I couldn't wait to show Welker, like, hey, you know, who's the project now? Like, in your face, like, I spent all day practicing. So as soon as guys started showing up to the office, you know, we started working, we started practicing. And, you know, Welker's like, wow, you've really gotten better over the weekend. I'm like, you're damn right I got better over the weekend. I was like, you called me a project. He's like, I didn't call you a project. I was like, you did. I heard you. And he's like, oh, you know, I was just kidding. I was like, no, you weren't. You said it serious. And I was focused on getting to leadership. And all I kept thinking about was Chris Bruno, you know, getting to leadership in his first 6 or 7 days. So I actually wound up getting promoted into leadership that first week. So Monday through Friday, you know, qualified on Saturday morning. So I beat Chris's, you know, time frame. And, you know, I started building my crew. I started taking out interviews. I started my first guy, you know, the first or second week in September of 2007. He got to leadership on September 15th of 2007. He was like a test interview from Connecticut. His name was Rich Del Servo. So he was the first leader that I put on my team. He started, you know, 3-4 weeks after I did the interview. He had to move down here to North Jersey from Connecticut. And I remember at the end of the interview when he said, yeah, I'm going to move here so I can be closer to my daughter. You know, I went into Tony's office and I was like, I said, hey, I was like, Rich is going to move here. And Tony's like, yeah, that's good. I was like, no, you don't understand. He's moving to North Jersey for the job. And Tony's like, no, that's good. He's like, you did a good interview. I was like, no, he's moving, like, for the job. And Tony's like, yeah, that's fine. I was like, okay, as long as you understand, like, he's moving here for this. I was like, I drive in every day. He's moving. And he's like, yeah, it's totally fine. So, you know, I built my crew and, you know, was coming through the program, and I had a goal of getting promoted by the holiday party in 2007. And a couple of days before the holiday party, I was very close to getting promoted. And, we had 2 clients at the time, so I started selling certificates. Certificates transitioned into home improvements door to door. That's also when Home Depot, became like a test client as well. So I was one of the first guys that was doing residential. I did do some Home Depot, but I built my crew on home improvements door to door. And on December 13th of 2007, I lost, 4 leaders on my team, 2 first generation and, 2 second gen. So in that moment, it was, probably the first time that I, thought about quitting. Why did this happen? And of course it was my fault. I came back one night and I said that the call center was stealing the leads that we were generating in the field. And of course my crew heard it. They heard me say it. That next day, Greg Malini doesn't show up, and I would call them up. It's like, Greg, where are you? And he's like, you were right. I'm going to go do something a little bit safer. And, Charles Acosta doesn't show up. And I was like, Charles, what happened? He's like, you were right with what you said. I was like, I was just in a bad mood. And I'm like, I wasn't right. I was just emotional. But I really felt like Lexi from the call center in Dallas was stealing our leads for Home Remodelers Group. And I voiced it to everybody, and it taught me a tough lesson of, complaining. And, to Mosher's credit in the beginning, that was a trait of leadership that maybe, I had to work on, and I needed those lessons to happen. But it was probably the one time that I, genuinely looked at and said, hey, maybe this isn't for me. But all I thought about was my father, saying, see, I told you that wouldn't work out. So I couldn't give him that satisfaction. I couldn't, give him that credit to where, he would be able to come back and say, look, I was right. So I sat down with Tony that Saturday, and, we set up a game plan for, me to get promoted within 4 weeks, taking out interviews every day, doing, running successful car rides, setting a standard for my team. And I wound up getting promoted 4 weeks after that on January 15th of 2008, which actually turned out to be a big positive because Tyler Reese actually got promoted before me. And when he got promoted at the holiday party, he wound up going to the other market that was open for home improvements, which was in Cincinnati, Ohio, with a gutter client. So he went to Cincinnati, and I wound up going to South Jersey to work with Power Windows and Siding, which at the time was a tiny little home improvement company, and probably similar to that gutter client that was based out of Cincinnati. But because Tyler got promoted first, they looked at it as it would be easier for him to go on an expansion. So he went to Cincinnati. I went an hour and a half south and went to South Jersey, which was, the best thing that could possibly happen at the time. When, of course, my crew fell apart, it was the worst thing that could possibly happen. But looking back on it, it all happened for a reason. And, I came down there, and, it opened up on March 1st of 2008. And, that's how I started in the business. And, that's how I started in the field, and, what I did and what programs I worked on in order to get promoted. So that's the short version of what I started on, and what the interview process looked like.
No, that's awesome. Thanks, Ken. And I know you're talking about some of the guys are like, what do you mean riddles? Well, you guys have heard stories, and it's funny how our stories, there's some similarities. And our business then was so cookie cut in the way that we interviewed. We would interview somebody for 9 hours. So the interviewer would have to take the interviewee out into the territory door to door and still set the pace, make money, and make sure that the interview wanted to do the business and be excited about it, and then wrap the day up. So they would give riddles to kill like 2.5 hours to keep the person thinking, but also at the same point in time, give them the opportunity to actually go sell. So it's funny when you said riddles. I haven't thought about that in a little while. And a lot of the guys and gals on here, they're like, what do you mean? Why was the interview so long? I don't understand. And we, Adam, myself, Mike, Jeremy, always tell them stories about how our interviews were 9 hours long, where today a guy will do a second round interview in like 20 minutes. He's like, he's ready to go. I'm like, there's no way. that you just did all of that in 20 minutes. So thanks, Ken, for that. Appreciate it. What do you think was the most challenging aspect of the management training program for you as you made your way toward management or ownership? So how long did you spend, you just told us, but how long did you spend from day one to getting promoted a little after the holiday party? And what do you think was the most one thing that was the most challenging aspect for you?
The biggest challenge, I started June 7th of '07, and then I opened up on March 1st of 2008. I got promoted into assistant management on January 15th, so I guess that's 8 months or so. The biggest challenge, though, that I had was that I definitely managed people through what my goals were versus listening to them to what their goals were and finding their hot spots. So I definitely had to be a better listener. If somebody didn't, want to get to management, or if somebody didn't want to, make $1 million, I was definitely too hard on them. And I almost tried to force them into thinking that way. And what's weird too is that challenge, I realized it earlier on in the training program that I had to work on it. But even in my personal life, I had to be a better listener at home. And, even in my relationship, even when I first started in the business, I, would say business first, relationship second. And that stuff, it was what I thought was, supposed to be said, or what I thought was cool, but, it wasn't the reality. And, I learned that lesson fast in the training program when it came to business, but realizing also that lesson in, I think it was 2016, at home with my relationship, because, there's, people on this call that, manage their crew, and, they're managing also a personal life and, a relationship that they have at home, to where it's definitely important, to have aligned goals with your spouse, whoever you're close with, and stuff like that. But I was a poor listener at home. We always did what I wanted to do, instead of realizing that I had to make, her the priority, the same as I had to make my people, my crew, the priority of what their goals were. I was failing to listen at that same thing at home. And I remember in 2016, it was a Sunday, and Jess wanted to go to a wine festival, and I'm like, I'm not going to a wine festival. I don't like wine, and the Giants are playing the Redskins, and I'd rather watch the game. It's Sunday. I'm tired. I don't want to do it. And she's like, okay, I'm going to ask my cousin. I was like, okay, whatever you want to do. And I didn't really like her cousin. So we came home that Sunday, and so she gets ready to go to the wine festival, and she gets dressed up and comes outside, and she's like, okay, I'm leaving. And I was like, why are you so dressed up? She's like, I'm not dressed up. I have jeans on and a shirt. I was like, well, you look too nice. And she's like, what the hell are you talking about? She's like, I'm wearing what I'm wearing. So she goes to the wine festival. I watched the Giants game. The Giants lose by 2. So I was like, well, that was a waste of 4 hours. And she comes back and she's like, oh, you would have loved it. We had such a great time. I was like, why are you in such a good mood? She was like, why would I not be in a good mood? I'm like, so then I just picked a fight with her over nothing. And that next morning I woke up and I'm like, damn. I'm like, Jess is gonna leave me. If I don't become a better listener at home, she's either gonna wind up dumping me, or she's gonna wind up cheating on me because she's gonna be unhappy in the relationship. And I'm like, I have to change. If I work so hard Monday through Saturday, and I'm focused on the business and my guys and running an office and all that stuff, and if I'm home for Saturday night and Sunday, then I got to make sure that I put her goals first of what she wants to do. And even if, I didn't want to go to the wine festival, it was important to her, and I had to be a better listener. So in 2016, I had many deep reflections of my personal life and, what I needed to focus on there. But it's weird that it was the same challenge with managing my crew, with listening to their goals and managing them with that. And also, a lot of the stuff that I said early on in business of it's business or nothing. And, that's not true. For me, it's not true. Not that I'm not focused on the business and put in, a good amount of hours, but It's making what needs to be a priority at that time a priority. And if it's 6 hours on a Sunday with a significant other, then, if that relationship's important, then in those 6 hours, their goals and their priorities are what's first. And as a good leader, I think that's important. I wish I would have learned that lesson earlier on in my personal life. It probably would have made, some fights that, we got into or, anything, a lot easier early on in the relationship. And I've been with Jess, since I started. I met her December of 2007, and we started dating May of 2008. So I've been with her ever since. So it's been, as long as I've known Zach, I've known my wife. And so it's definitely been a relationship that's managed and grown, through running a business and, dealing with everything that we deal with.
Sure. So I was going to ask you what you would tell your 22, 23-year-old self, and somebody asked at the same point in time, what advice would someone working on going from trainer to management, et cetera, et cetera. And I think you're saying all of that kind of is combined, right? It's just, you wish you were a better listener. And, guys, I knew Ken when he was a rookie, and he was dead set in his goals. And I remember him asking me one time, I don't even know if Ken remembers, he's like, hey man, do you think I should drink? You think like people would look at me differently? And I'm like, what do you mean? And he's like, I don't know, like, I don't fucking drink. And like, I see people have like a cocktail here and there. Like, is that what I'm supposed to do? And I realized he was so disciplined and very stuck into, what Ken was after. And that's one of the reasons, he's so well disciplined in our business and achieved so much so fast over a career, early on in the business. At the same point in time, he started to develop that point of like, I should probably listen, or should I do this, or should I do that? So makes total sense. And I mean, Ken, from a business life and a personal life, and people always want to know, to become a national, to become, I think, a program director, et cetera. I mean, I remember you putting in 100-hour weeks, 120-hour weeks. Like that's what we did. I mean, there were the days when we were in the office when we talked about, we were afraid to leave. And the only place we went, it wasn't to get lunch, it was to go to the field. If we weren't going in the field or we weren't at the office, we didn't go anywhere. So I don't want to scare a lot of the new guys, but I guess, what did you do to keep that discipline? How did you also balance at the same point in time, kind of personal and business? And maybe you're saying what you said earlier, I didn't balance personal really well, and I wish I would have done that early on. So I guess my question would be, how did you balance those? And then also, what kept you so disciplined? And then even when you there's rookie managers potentially on this call, you hit Rookie Manager of the Year. I got an achievement award. I was so necked, right? Well, we got promoted to regional on the same place. So at the same day. And then you got national earlier than most. You got program director. You made $1 million before most people ever did. You've made well into the 7 figures. How did you balance the personal business? How did you stay disciplined? It's easy to say, how did you stay disciplined? I think when you are successful and sometimes when you're not successful. So I guess, how did you stay on course there?
Okay, to expand on, what advice would I give myself? I would give myself, even looking back, like if I could go back to high school or even when I was younger, which obviously I can't, the lessons that the business have taught me, definitely looking back on it now, could have made a big impact. And, I hung out with who I hung out with. So, if I played sports or I was on the football team, I hung out with guys on the football team. Not that I, wouldn't talk to, people that were in different, had a different interest or, came from different parts of society. Like I stayed in my lane, and that's the only lane that I stayed in. And, the business has taught me the value of networking. And if I could go back to, before the business or, even if I look at high school, like I went to high school with this kid, Jesse Eisenberg. So Jesse Eisenberg is an actor now. He was in the movie with Woody Harrelson. He played Mark Zuckerberg in the Facebook movie. So I went to high school with that kid. And I never was close with him because he was into acting and I played sports. I saw him years later in New York, and he actually approached me and said like, hey Ken, how's everything going? I was like, oh, hey Jesse, and how's everything? And that was like the extent of our interaction. But if I would have if I knew what I knew now about the value of relationships and the value of networking, I would have had so much different of a, broad spectrum of, who I associated with. And, and coming into the business, like building the relationships with you and, the stories with Mosier and, everybody, like I was so aggressive with networking early on in the business, even with building a relationship with Larry. Like I remember going down in my rookie year of management and spending time with Mike Terranoni down in his office in Hollywood, Florida, and spending a few days with Carl Foss and, just sitting there asking them questions, because if I wanted to be in the position that they're in, I wanted to speed up that process any way possible. And I looked at it and said, well, if I start talking or working or thinking the way that they think now earlier on in my program, I could speed, some of those things up. And, I did that early on, and I was super fortunate because it wound up, paying dividends for me and the success that I had early on in the program. And, as far as staying disciplined, like, at 30 years old, I had almost like a midlife crisis of, almost being 40. And in my first, 5 or 6 years, from 24 to 30, I was so focused on running my office and, not drinking for sure. And, so that's definitely still ingrained in, how I think and stuff like that. But I'm definitely not as, I guess you could say, militant with it as I used to be, or as my rookie years, to where it was like a rule of no drinking. But at 30, I looked at it and said, like, I need to change habits in my personal life now that are going to have an effect on me at 40 years old and at 50 years old. And, I looked at my father and I looked at my family and I saw the health problems that, that he had. And I'm like starting to think about, okay, Jess and I are going to have children soon. And, I want to be able to, run around in the yard with them and, do stuff with them. And, not that I was like super out of shape and not that I was, any of those things, but I definitely wasn't healthy. I definitely didn't eat healthy. I definitely didn't exercise. And at 30, I started looking into, having better habits and being more disciplined, with those habits. And I started doing a lot of studying of, like the prefrontal cortex and the part of the brain that controls that. And I was fortunate that at 30, I said, okay, I'm going to start exercising. And I got really big into Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu and Muay Thai. So I found a gym, near our office that, would do private lessons with us. So, the lessons start with a CrossFit class at 6 a.m. And then at 7 a.m. we do Muay Thai or Jiu-Jitsu for an hour and a half. And, it's right up the street from the office. So when I moved into my new office, I put a shower in so I can go right from Jiu-Jitsu at 8:30, to the office to be ready by 9 o'clock. And I started, getting, a couple guys. There's nothing more humbling than Jiu-Jitsu because, the moment that you think you can fight or the moment that, you think that you're comfortable in uncomfortable situations, Jiu-Jitsu definitely teaches you that you're not comfortable in situations. So I've learned a lot of lessons doing that, but it forced me to be a lot more disciplined. Plus, it put me in way better shape, and it started really exercising that part of my brain with the prefrontal cortex, and it really got me so much more better. It's got me so much better at business. It got me so much more confident with guys. If I look back on college, the only bad grade that I got was introduction to public speaking. I don't like people. I'm not a crowd person. It would not be the situation that I would want to be in. But with having discipline in my personal life with, exercising and, I was fortunate and said, okay, I want to do jiu-jitsu and I want to do Muay Thai. It definitely gave me a greater confidence going into a meeting with any of the clients that we work with, going into a meeting with guys. because it put me in situations like I have a major claustrophobia problem. So I can't even sit on the window seat of an airplane, let alone have somebody who's 200 pounds smothering me when you're exhausted, with a gi and, just in a position that you're just not comfortable in. And I've had many of not panic attacks, but, where you need to really control your breathing and your mind, or else you're going to totally freak out. And one of the hardest things that I've ever done in my life was when we did our blue belt test for jiu-jitsu. They put you in, it's almost like you're getting jumped by, 50 people, and 2 people can be beating you up at once, 3 people, and they're just smothering you, and you're exhausted. And all the times that you want to think about quitting, like, you can't. And at the end of the 30 minutes, they make everybody stand up, and you take off your gi top, and they whip you in the stomach with wet belts that hold the gi together. And I remember being done with it, and I'm like, what am I doing? Like, why do I need to be doing this? I'm already, somewhat successful, making good money. Like, why am I putting myself through this? But, when that day was done, I walked down to my car, and I just sat in my car, and I couldn't even type in the address back home to drive home on my GPS. And I drove around the streets of Philadelphia for like 2 hours because I just kept turning, and I'm like, I can't even lift my arms up. And I got home, and Jess was like, what the hell is wrong with you? I was like, Jess, I'm like, I just need to sit here. Like, she was like, we have to go to Charlie Brown's with my family tonight. I was like, you're driving and I'm sitting in the passenger seat, and, just leave me alone. Like, just don't talk to me. But it taught me a lot about myself, and, it definitely taught me to be uncomfortable in uncomfortable situations, and waking up early. I get up every morning at 4:45, and, I pack my clothes the night before and prepare everything the night before. And, successful people like Mark Zuckerberg and the President Obama, like all these people, they talk about the simplicity of a wardrobe, or limiting the amount of important decisions that you make on non-important things. Like, what you're wearing isn't an important decision. And by getting my clothes ready the night before, and getting my bag ready and my food ready the night before, like, it forced me to have so much better of habits, because that next morning I wasn't thinking about what socks to wear, what this to wear. Like, I just grabbed my stuff and I left. And I went downstairs, I grabbed my bag, I drank my protein shake, and, showed up to work out at 6 o'clock and stayed there for 2.5, 3 hours every morning, 5 days a week. And, it's definitely led to a more disciplined lifestyle, and it's definitely added hours to the business, and, the time that I would be away from the house. What's funny too, you said it before, when we first started, we made changes to our interview process to where the manager was doing the heavy lifting of what the program was. And it was one of the initiatives that I worked on, and I, did. And when I sat down with my first interview, they asked me, like, what are the hours? My response, I was like, well, 75, 80 hours a week. And after the interview, we did an exit interview with that person. And one of the other managers asked the candidate, they're like, so what do you think of the interview? They're like, well, everything sounds great. They're like, but the one thing that I just can't wrap my brain around is how nonchalantly Ken said 80 hours a week. Like, he just said it like it was nothing. And Rob was kind of laughing, because he was like, that's like the part-time schedule. If you want the full-time schedule, he works out every morning for 3 hours at 5 o'clock. So if you want the full-time schedule, you're up to 100 hours a week. So we've definitely made adjustments with that and changes with that. But for sure, there is, many of our first years to where, I looked at it and said, like, somebody is going to be a successful entrepreneur because they're willing to put in the hours. But I've learned a lot of hard lessons over the course of the last couple of years to where that necessarily wasn't the truth. And somebody getting promoted into management and having the mindset of, I survived and I got promoted into management, versus I'm the right person, and, I have the right characteristics and traits, and, I didn't necessarily survive the training program, but I grew in a program that was conducive for growth, that allowed me to, be in now the position of management, versus, some of those early owners that I promoted, when they got into management, it was like a sense of relief, because they didn't have to now work as hard as what somebody had to work in the field in order to get there. But, I've had a lot of hard lessons in my last 2 years of, survival mode is not going to equal successful mode. And I need to focus more on, attracting the right people and bringing in the right people, and then putting them in a system that, developed them the right way, recruited them the right way, continue to develop them the right way. And of course, having like the right culture inside the office. And that would allow me to have a way better game plan or footprint, for somebody to be successful. And all that stuff ties into, discipline and, stuff like that. And, I've definitely, you're right. I've always been disciplined. I don't think somebody has to wake up at, 5 o'clock to, exercise your prefrontal cortex, meditation for 8 minutes a day, making sure that you're sleeping 6.5 hours a night, changing your mindset. I can versus I won't, so eating healthy. So those are like the 5 big things that if somebody looks at it and says, okay, because having better habits or being more disciplined, it's not a decision that, you wake up in the morning and say, okay, today I'm going to be more disciplined, or today I'm going to have better habits. We all, do it on New Year's and say, this is my year for whatever. But a month goes by, 2 weeks goes by, and, we lose all these moments of, what I call like willpower moments, to where we're forced with this decision of, what choice I'm going to make. And if I give myself that ability to make the wrong choice, it's just going to lead to, poor choices later on. And, we discount what our long-term success, of what we want it to look like. And, for me, my long-term success, I want to make a lot of money. I want to build something that's truly great, and what I need to do in order to get there. And if it's the discipline in my personal life, it's, if it's staying on top of what I eat, how long I sleep, exercising, because some of the biggest mistakes that I made early on in management was just I was unhealthy. And at 25 years old or 26 years old, if I'm unhealthy and eating like shit, it doesn't crush me. But now that I'm 36 years old and soon 40 and soon 45, like the habits that I instill in myself now and at 30 and 31 and 32 and earlier on, I can build off of that as I get older. And if I look at my whole career from 24 to 30, I don't know the exact dollar amount of what I made, but from 30 to 36, the dollar amount of income and success, and not that that should be the full indicator of, what Ken Weinraub is or what my success is, because I don't think it's at any of what my indicators should be, but my success in the business and dealing with people and leadership, income-wise, changed significantly from 30 to 36 years old compared to 24 to 30. And anybody can make the argument on this call, you got better at the business and more experience and stuff like that, which is true, but that's not, what those working on this part of the brain and, having those things that, of what Jiu-Jitsu and, those things taught me made a significant increase in what my own threshold was for what I could handle. So that is, that's how I feel about the discipline. And for sure the networking, like there's guys that don't network, they don't, seek advice, they don't network up, they only associate with the people in their clique. Like I could have been friends with Jesse Eisenberg, and that relationship now, like Jesse Eisenberg knows Mark Zuckerberg. So if I look at relationships, now that I'm 36, would there have been value now in my platform and in the position that I'm in to have a good relationship with Jesse Eisenberg? Absolutely. Hey, Jesse, like I would love to set up a call with Mark Zuckerberg. Maybe he can make it happen. But if I don't have that relationship, or that relationship is, a high if we see each other at best, then, I fucked that up. And of course, at 16 or 17, I'm not thinking about, hey, one day, Ken, you're going to run a successful sales organization and this could be a valuable relationship. So none of us have that. My parents weren't, Tiger Woods' father who had a golf club in his hand at, 6 days old. Like that's not how I was, nobody was doing that. But now I can rectify that, and I could really look at relationships and say, hey, if there's a Larry Tenenbaum in this business, then I'm going to have a good relationship with Larry Tenenbaum. If there's a Jeremy Mosier, I'm going to have a good relationship with Jeremy Mosier. And I'm going to see the value in that. And, I can't go back in time and change my work ethic in high school and with sports. And for sure, if I knew what I knew now about a work ethic, like I used to look at pro athletes and say, oh man, they're so lucky. That's bullshit. They're not lucky. Their work ethic, if they're dedicated to their craft, like I watched the documentaries the same as probably many people on this call with Michael Jordan. And I don't watch that and say, wow, like he's such an anomaly. Like I get it. I understand as to why he's the greatest because, the will to win, what he was willing to do to succeed, but he also had good coaches. You look at, a big moment for him wasn't when he was getting coached by Doug Collins. Doug Collins, every play was give Jordan the ball. And sure, he was a great athlete and a great basketball player, but they said in the one documentary, it wasn't until Phil Jackson, taught Jordan that he could trust his teammates that they really started winning. And if you remember, if anybody's watching those, when John Paxton hit that game-winning three-point shot, that's when Jordan realized, hey, I can trust Phil Jackson and I can trust my teammates. And by him entrusting the people around him and learning from the people around him and gaining everything that he can from his teammates and from the people that he was surrounded with, that's when Michael Jordan reached the greatest of all time. Sure, his athleticism and his ability, he could have been in the conversation of, man, this guy's incredibly talented, and maybe he still would have won, one or two championships. But would he have won as many as he did? Would he have accomplished as many as many as what he did in his career if he didn't have Phil Jackson, and if Phil Jackson didn't teach him that important lesson? And I have no clue what brought Phil Jackson and Michael Jordan together and what had happened the year before for Jordan to get picked by the Bulls and what the Portland Trailblazers needed to have in order not to pick him and all this shit. Why they fired Doug Collins, but it happened. And I started in this business and I got surrounded with people that taught me things that I never even thought about. And when I got this platform, I looked at it and, ran with it. And, that's what pushes me every day. Like it definitely is what drives me. The money, I don't even look at it like it's real. I care. I don't even think about it. If the bank account goes up, fantastic. It's irrelevant.
And I think too, one of the things that stands out for everybody on this call, if a kid made money, like he said at an early age, and did extremely well, I think in all aspects of our business, but it's kind of cool somebody that still later is trying to develop, still trying to fix things, still trying to make themselves a better person. And I think that's a big point for a lot of us on this call. Sometimes it's, I'm the top sales rep in the office, and I don't mean to say who gives a shit. That's fantastic, but now what's next? Or I'm the best recruiter, or my crew's doing well, or for some of us, I'm a hot rookie owner on this call doing big things. But it's cool to hear Ken where he's strived and hit, not to build Ken up, but it's not all about Ken. What can we take from this? A lot of it is success. You should look at it, okay, now what's that next thing? What's my goal? Or, how can I redirect? And what's one ideal, one goal or one quality that you would say someone for management should use or focus on to achieve success in management? And we got that question and then one more.
The quality or the attribute that somebody should have, I think one of the hardest things about being a leadership is that, you always have to put yourself last, if at all. And, it's always about requalifying yourself as a leader for the people that, you're overseeing and that, you're coaching. And, like you just said, like I am my biggest critic, and, the stuff that we're working on now and the changes, I looked at my career in door-to-door and said, like, in 2018, I looked at it and said, I'm going to fail at this business. And I looked at it and said that I was going to fail at this business because we put out 2 unsuccessful promotions out of my office. My owners were struggling financially. The field wasn't as healthy as what the field should be. And, I looked at it and said, I'm always going to have to continue to motivate people. And if I stop doing a rep call, or if I stop doing a meeting, that, things are going to go backwards. And, it screwed me up for 2018. And what's crazy is that in 2018, I made more money that year than I've ever made in my life. And the amount of money, didn't change the fact that I knew I had to blow stuff up for what my organization was and what I was pushing on the guys. So you talked before about, the discipline with not drinking and stuff like that. I had to change how I reached success from 2018, from 2008, 2009. And I couldn't look at the financial success that I had and said, okay, well, no, I'm good at the business. If you would have asked me in 2018 if I'm good at the business, I would have said yes. And I would have said, no, of course, I'm great. If I look at myself now in 2018 and all the years before that, I was not good at the business. I made money because I was fortunate to be working on programs that I was building. And, I put myself in a good income possibility situation, but I wasn't good at the business. I put out unsuccessful offices from my own office. And if I wasn't able to put out successful offices, how could I expect my owners to do it? And the first thing that we looked at was our interview process. Door to door was a misleading first round interview. And, it was bring somebody in for 2 seconds and, pitch them and bring them back in for a day of, I did a leaders meeting in October of 2018. And I asked my leaders to explain to me the business. And I had 18 leaders in my office, and the answers that I got were horrible. Their answers of what the business is, what sales is, how do they explain sales, how do they explain commission, were the worst answers I could ever imagine in my life. I walked into my office with the other managers that are in my building, and I'm like, Rob, we are fucked. Like, we're going to fail. We're never going to be able to open up a successful office. We're putting the onus on the leader to do the recruiting. The most qualified person in an office to do the recruiting is the manager. And we're putting that pressure on the leader. And that can't be what we're doing in order for us to be successful. So we changed it to where the owner was doing, an hour-long first-round interview and explaining, everything and giving that person full detail of look, this is what the business is. And that was the first change that we had to make. The second change that we had to make was through our training process. We always looked at door to door and said, hey, door to door, it has the best, the easiest money because they don't have to pay minimum wage. So what I looked at is what I thought was our biggest strength. It actually was our biggest weakness. And it was our biggest weakness because it took away pressure from me and the owners to really focus on putting a well-trained rep into the field. So we could throw shit up against the wall and see what sticks, but that's never going to be somebody's recipe for success. We needed a pressure of training pay. We needed a pressure of better training. And that lesson, came hard because in July of 2019, we got busted on Verizon for a pretty significant amount of fraud. And it was happening in 4 of our offices. And we were doing, at the time, 550, 600 apps a day, which on Verizon was big. And it was big money. To me, I don't know if, maybe that was, a couple $100,000 a week. And I'm looking at it saying, man, we made these changes with with recruiting, we're flying. And when I called up Larry and I'm like, look, we have this fraud problem that, somebody came to me and admitted. He's like, well, it's a nature of direct sales and guys are always going to, try and cheat the system. And I said, look, I appreciate that answer, but that's not true. If that was happening to 5 people, then okay, maybe it's just the nature of the business. We had 286 reps that had went out in the field and at least committed an act of fraud at least once. It was a problem with how we trained. It was a problem with how fast people went to the field. And it was for sure a problem with who we were recruiting in the first round interview to come in and work. So the second part of what we looked at was forcing door-to-door guys to do a week-long training with somebody with a new hire in the office for 3-4 hours a day, which was something that we had never focused on, and to force the owner to put a training pay onus on somebody starting. And, that's what my last 2.5 years has looked like. We've gotten involved. You asked in the beginning how many offices. There's 127 door-to-door offices. We work on Verizon, we work on AT&T, we work on Frontier, we work on Inspire Energy. We still do power, which was the first client that I worked on when we opened up. The debt settlement with Start New. We just got involved in Webware, which is SEO optimization, going business to business. I built a quality control team that calls every order that a rep does with Energy, with AT&T, with Frontier and Verizon. They create a next day report for the owners and the reps. So we have a team of about 15 people that are working on that every single day. We're spending $40,000, $50,000 a month to have them on payroll to do what they do. So we've built that team since 2018. This year and end of last year, I'm building an internal call center for administration to where I do the phone calls for the administrators out of my building and created opportunity for the administration position. We had the mentorship program for door-to-door, and it's one of the biggest things that I didn't like. So by me building an internal call center that books interviews, in an office in California or in whatever market in the country, it allows me to, keep my eyes on it. So we've been working on that. And we have 11 girls that are making phone calls for about 20 offices. And, we've been working on that inside my own office. But, for the last 2.5 years, that's, what my focus has been. And I blew my situation up. And look, I love talking about the money and, all that, stuff. But I don't look at my story as success because look, if you don't have a $1,500 average paycheck, and you guys as reps on this call and as owners on this call, our business, when we come back live from this pandemic and how this is going to change the country and the world for however many years, and it's going to be in the history books of what happened. And I think for us, we have a unique opportunity to not only make our business more attractive, because we are going to be able to go back and provide opportunity in a totally unsettling world that we're all living in right now. But we have a unique opportunity to really focus on, being better and really building something that, we don't loosen our standards, but we raise our standards. And, my motto to our owners is first who, then what. And I spent so many years motivating through opportunity and, opportunity meetings and all this other nonsense that if it wasn't bringing in the right person, it was temporary motivation for the wrong person that, wasn't going to stay in management, wasn't going to stay in leadership. They didn't demonstrate leadership skills. They didn't have a lot of these things. So, raising our standards. I preached to our reps and to our owners that our focus was a $1,500 average paycheck in the field. And to some people, that number was like $1,500. Ken, have you lost your mind? And then some people said, hey, that makes sense, because if a rep in the field is averaging $1,500 a week, which our clients have given us that ability to where a rep should be earning that. If you look at my program to when I was in the field, when Zach was in the field, if a rep was making $500 a week, they were the best rep in the office. If somebody was making that now, they would not be the best rep in the office. And that doesn't mean selling Verizon door-to-door is harder. It doesn't mean selling Inspire door-to-door is harder. It means we need better training. And it means we need to focus on who we're recruiting and what that person has the ability to handle. And by us focusing on that, it's going to bring up that average paycheck. It's going to bring a better person that's in the field and that eventually is going to be taking on leadership opportunities in the office. I got promoted into leadership in 6 days. How did that qualify me for leadership? Somebody isn't demonstrating leadership skills in 6 days. Somebody's demonstrating leadership skills in 2, 3, 4 months. So for us on the door-to-door side, we promoted too fast into that position. So we've changed it to where somebody can't even open up the conversation of leadership until 3 months after they've been with us, to where we really know that this person, when given responsibility, they actually have the wherewithal to handle it and to do it. And if that means we grow slower, then so be it, we grow slower. But if we grow right, and if I have the average paycheck in the field at $1,500, because for the owners on this call, think about the average paycheck of $1,500 in the field for a rep, and you're managing 15 people in your office. If that means my reps are making $1,500 a week, what does that mean the owner's making? That means my ownership position is I can promote that my average owner's making $150,000 a year, $200,000 a year. And looking at myself harshly in the mirror, I didn't have that. I didn't have anywhere close to that. My average owner was probably making, every one of my owners qualified for the stimulus check from the government. It made me sick to my stomach, because that means every one of those guys made less than $100,000. Does that mean that I'm gonna have a successful platform of what I can look at a new hire and say, look, when you come into my office, your expectation is $1,500 a week. And when you get promoted into management, I can guarantee you that you're going to be making north of 150 or 200,000 bucks a year. But I can only do that if that's my average paycheck. And I can only do that if my training is in line with that. I can only do that if my first round interview is in line with that. I can only do that if my first gate in administration is in line with that. And then it's building a conducive culture for growth. Because I look at somebody's success somebody's going to have success in the business if they're good at 6 things. The first thing is administration. So I have to be good at administration. I have to have a good administrator. Too many owners, they settle for a poor first gate of their business. And coming out of this pandemic, my first gate has to be somebody that I would trust with my life. Because if it's not, I'm not going to reap the benefits of a 20% unemployment rate. I'm not going to reap the benefits of a real opportunity that we can give people to get promoted into management. So my first gate in administration has to be good. My second gate with recruiting has to be good, which means that the owner needs to have a great first round interview. And they should settle for nothing less. If they're not the best interviewer in their office, they shouldn't be an owner. And for me, when I got back to doing the interviews back in October of 2018, my retention for the first month was 0. And I would call Larry and be like, Larry, I'm so excited about this guy coming in. The next day, nobody would show up. And I'd be like, do I suck at first round interviews? And if I suck at first round interviews, what success is my organization going to have? They're going to have nothing. They're going to fail. Because if I can't do it, they can't do it. So we had to really look at the first round interview, and it took us some time. But in February of 2019, we started gaining really good momentum with the first round interview. Now there's a lot of guys that are 50 times better than me on what the first round interview. So the owner has to be the best recruiter. The third thing is initial training. That first week that somebody has with me in my office, and you could argue, should that first week of training be a week or 2 weeks? Fuck, make it 3 weeks. More training, the better. You're not going to hurt yourself by doing 3 weeks of training. For our guys, them hearing 3 weeks of training when they're used to 2 days of standing in an atmosphere room where everybody's screaming at each other, they're like, whoa, that was training before. That's not training. That's terrible. It's horrible. It's an anomaly that we built any offices anyway, in reality. So initial training. The second is continued training. So training doesn't just stop after 3 weeks or 2 weeks, because then there has to be continued training all throughout somebody's program. That's like the next hurdle. The fifth challenge, or the fifth thing somebody has to be good at, is leadership development. And leadership development doesn't just come with the owner's ability to develop leaders. I can tell you any story about my discipline or working out or this or that, but if somebody's the wrong person on this call, it doesn't make a difference. It's in one ear and out the other. And that's not somebody that we want an owner to be spending time with anyway, developing them on leadership skills that they don't have or that they're never going to have. I had leadership skills in my DNA, so it was easy for them to be developed. And I'm not an anomaly. I'm not a weirdo. I was asked the right questions. I was challenged the right way. And then the last thing is culture. You know, what the culture is in the office. You know, in February, and January, we promoted a lot to our guys that, you're competing against a 3% unemployment rate. And people in 2020 and 2019 have a different expectation of what they expect from a job. And that will still ring true with what the world looks like in May of 2020 or June and July of 2020. People will still have a higher expectation. They're going to have a higher expectation now for safety procedures and, the owner of the business making sure that, they're, thinking about that. But still, somebody's expectation of of what they should make or what they should do is higher than what it's ever been. And we as owners and you guys as leaders, we can't lower our expectations just because there's going to be a bigger pool of recruiting out there. Because if somebody's DNA is $300 a week, then just because they want a job doesn't mean they have the DNA to do our business. Doesn't mean they have the DNA, and doesn't mean that owner should hire them. Because we have to be extra careful as owners, and you guys have to be extra careful as leaders. The mishires that you have are going to be the ones that cause problems inside the stores. The mishires that I have are going to be the ones that are overly aggressive at a customer's door that aren't practicing good social distancing. The rep that's hired, that's respectable, that listens, that understands like what the current state of the country is, those are going to be the ones that are understanding and sympathetic to the customer. The one that's just like, look, I just need to make money and I'll do whatever, I'm going to make money. We might look at this person and say, hey, man, this person's so juicy. They're so motivated, but they have no standard of themselves and they have no expectation of themselves. They're not somebody that should come into the program. They're going to be that person that's okay with a $400 paycheck. They're going to be that person that lowers the standard of what the field makes. And if you want to focus on the first problem that everybody needs to focus on, it's the rep paycheck to the field. Because now, more than ever, that's more important to every single one of you guys. Because standards are going to go up. When unemployment tomorrow gets announced that it's 18%, or next month gets announced that it's 20%, whatever that reality is of what that number is, like that number is, that is wild. Like it's hard, it's scary. But it doesn't mean, wow, I'm so motivated now because I'm going to be able to have a zillion interviews. It's motivating because my standard of what my expectations are just got a whole lot higher. And the person that's coming in for that interview with me or with my owner, they better sell themselves even better on why I'm going to offer that position to that person. They show up late to a training class. They show up late to a Zoom call. They don't do their homework assignment and they don't come in the next day and pass the test. They're not somebody that's going to go out in the field and represent any one of our businesses the right way. And, look, my last 2.5 years, it's been, and it will continue to be, trying. And there's no end in sight. There's no, hey, in 5 years, like, I don't want to be in an office. I'm in an office every day. I'm not there until 10 o'clock, but, if I got home at 7 or 8 o'clock, I left my house at 5:30 every morning, Monday through Friday, and on Saturdays. Definitely had some fights 2 summers ago with my wife during the summertime because that was the first summer we were changing the interview, and I was so nervous about every day, and she was definitely not happy that I spent no time at home during the summer. It was definitely a lot of fights, so I definitely have to make up for it, this summer and next summer. But that's been my focus, and the call center, the quality control team, the divisions. Like, look, all these divisions work. They work because of the offer in the field. They work because of what the money is. All that stuff helps, but they work because, we bring the right people onto our bus and get the wrong people off of the bus. And it is a painful, painful lesson. And, it's tough. It's developing a whole new mindset. The biggest book, and I saw somebody wrote it on a question on the board, what book I suggest. The book that I read that changed a lot of my life was Good to Great. Jim Collins wrote it, but Good to Great is an eye-opening, humbling, heavy self-reflection book, and it shaped a lot of the changes that Door to Door as a business has made, changes that I've made, because if I can give a good speech and I need to give a good speech at 45 years old or 50 years old, to me, and that your opinion might be different, but to me, that business is not motivating. Like, for me to say to you, hey, I make, $1 million a year, what the fuck do you care? Like, I'm not taking you out to dinner. I'm not buying you a car. I'm not, building a house that you can live in. Like, it makes no difference to you. If you have a successful platform that you could have that same earnings potential because you could follow steps and we've made sure that you're the right person through our weeding out process, that should be motivating to you. My story is not motivating. My story is my story. Your story is your story. And the good news is that the last couple months, the last year, however long you've been in the business, none of that stuff matters because it's going to look and will continue to look a lot different. And you have the opportunity now to write whatever you want to write, for the next 10 years. And you might not say, hey, I want to manage 100 offices. You might not say, hey, I want to, do all these things. Every night I go to bed saying, why did I choose to build an administration call center? They give me the biggest headache out of anything that I'm managing. And every night I'm asking myself, why? Why did you do this, Ken? Why? Like, why make that decision? And then when I see better recruiting success, or, we're spending 14 minutes on the phone and the average administrator spends 3.5 minutes, and you see the results and you see the quality of people, I'm like, okay, this is why you're doing it. And again, I look at it like every day, I'm proving to my guys, to my owners, to the reps, because the opportunity to what that new hire is that starts in our office next week or whenever we start recruiting again, like, that's what is valuable. That's what's important. What value I provide to the owner that's been with me for 8 years, I don't want to say I don't really care. But if they can't make adjustments to what the business looks like now in 2020 for us, then they're going to fail anyway. And in February at Keys to Success in 2019, I must have said the words inevitable failure 850,000 times, because I knew that if owners weren't willing to adjust and they weren't willing to look at their business and say, okay, the business is not the same from what it was 10 years ago. It's not the same of what it was 5 years ago. And guess what? It's not going to be the same from what it was in March and April. It's going to be different. But now we have a way better opportunity. You look at Uber Eats delivery drivers. You look at Grubhub delivery drivers. Like, that job is now attractive because they're able to continue to work. We're going to be able to continue to work very soon, and we can make what we do even more attractive. And by working on our culture and by raising our standard of what our check is, and by raising our expectation and who we recruit and being focused on that, it makes our business, where the next 10 years is going to look so different than what it's looked like for the last 10 years. And I believe that to my core. And it's what I talk about every single day. And it's what I think about every single day. I go to bed at night, I think about it. I wake up thinking about it. I cry at night thinking about it. It's all I think about. Like, it's on my mind every day. How can I be better? And how can I make the business better? And how can I allow more people to be successful? Because I definitely do not want it to be that at the time that I run out of gas to motivate, that my situation falls apart. And that's what I've seen. That's what I saw in my world for many of years of door to door of what it was. And a lot of good people that could have been better if they had actually had the tools, to be successful. And one last thing, and I think we're at 45 minutes now, so it feels like it's only been 10. But years ago, my national, not Mosier, came to my office, and he had all of my leaders break down the program, and everybody said it differently. And he called me up, or he pulled me into my office afterwards, and he said, Ken, you're going to fail. And I said, Derek, I was thinking the same thing. What do I do? And he's like, well, you need to do this. You need to focus on this. And in 2018, I looked at it the same way. And not in the sense of fail that, Ken would make less money. Fail in a sense that I didn't have a successful program in place that really allowed guys underneath me to reach whatever level of success, they wanted to reach. And, that's why we had to make these changes. And a lot of the stuff that we looked at you guys in retail and said, well, they have to pay minimum wage, or they have to limit the hours. What I thought was our blessing was in reality our curse. It's not what made door-to-door more attractive. It made it at least less attractive, because our recipe of success was survive. Well, fuck, man, that's fucked up. And that's wrong. And even the hours, like I joke about hours, like we just changed ours to where our guys are in later, and our average person is working, 50 hours a week versus when I came to the field, 80 hours a week. And even with this pandemic, I was on the phone with my owners earlier this morning and said, hey, for the next 7 months, you got to figure out how to make sure how we can get 6 hours a day, so 36 hours a week, to where our reps are good. So, that's what our focus is now. It's not 50 hours, it's 36, 5 hours in the field, 4 hours in the field. More people are home, more people are working from home. So the products that we're selling are more essential now to people than they were before. Our talk tos are going to go up. We need to limit exposure to where people are less time in the office. So for the next 6 months, my reality should be, guys are working 30 hours a week. And in those 30 hours, they're making $1,500 a week. In those 30 hours, they're on Zoom calls. They're on all these training platforms that, they can be developing their leadership skills. And if I'm running a Zoom call and somebody shows up late, they're the wrong fucking person. What are you showing up late? You have nothing else to, you're working 30 hours a week. What else are you doing? And that's a leadership moment with that person, to where I'm looking at it saying, look, maybe this person's not going to be somebody that runs a business one day. And I can't be naive enough to think that they're going to be. So, a lot of the same leadership, development we've had, sure, maybe it's going to change until there's a vaccine and stuff like that. But I think we can all make, what we're doing a lot better. And years ago, I got on a call with all the NCs and said quality versus quantity. And for a year, every time I brought it up, Larry would be like, don't bring that up. And I fucked it up in 2018 because I brought up quality versus quantity, but I didn't put the pressure and the bullseye on my back to make sure that, door to door, not only listened to me talk about it, but, I did it. And in 2019 and in 2020, not only did we talk about it, but, we're doing it, and it feels so much better to open somebody up into management, and that they're going to be successful. And, in Good to Great, they talk about pushing this flywheel that's like this unmovable object, and all these companies that, went to, great businesses, 14 years, 20 years of struggle and decisions that people didn't agree with. And, when you're building momentum, it's not this big, one push that says, okay, we built momentum. And I looked at it in 2018, or maybe it was 2017, and, thought that that's what it would be. And it hasn't been that at all. It's been pushing that flywheel, and, one small push at a time. And eventually, after 2, 3, 4 years, you start seeing momentum. And the people that we've promoted over the course of the last 6, 7 months, their ability and ownership is drastically different than, what I promoted in 2000.